or the art kids too early, or we're going to end up with some really creative, exceptional minds who cannot identify themselves as being potential contributors to innovation in science down the line. So as we develop our programming and introduce our kids to science, let's make sure that we're providing those multiple entry paths that are tapping our kids' emotions and are making sure that they are fully engaged. I spoke with a gentleman who was developing some technology from France the other day. And of course, as I always do, I asked him what his background was, and he had studied, I think, biology for 7 years and was just shy of his PhD when he decided he was really tired of waiting for the opportunity to do something. And so he decided to give up on all of that pursuit and go into some technology and web design work, which is fabulous, and he's going to be successful in work, and I'm sure that the intersection of his science background and technology is great. But imagine, what if that creative mind had stayed actively engaged in science longer? That's the type of creativity. Science isn't just about knowing facts, it is about how to solve the problems that those facts present. So again, example after example of how we filter out particular learning styles too early. Another, just because I can't resist, another interesting one that we do in the U.S. is that, and there was an article about this recently, where our absolute best students go to the best schools of engineering, and then we make sure to get rid of at least 2/3 of them really, really early on. And so there's actually some good information, or this report was talking about how you could actually, we are more successful at producing strong engineers at the back end of college if they're going to middle tier schools than if they're going to the highest rated schools. So that means that 2/3 of our best students are being pushed out of engineering because we are using filters in a way that does not allow them to feel successful, to be successful early on in their college careers. Relevant. You know what? I had a hard time coming up with an example of something that wasn't relevant and what we shouldn't do in science education. And part of it is just because my job is to draw connections and to show people why things that sound inane are relevant. And it really is quite easy to make any kind of science, even science about deep space, relevant to a child on the south side of Chicago. What we forget to do in all of our communities is to build that bridge and to fill that gap. So too often we will sit in a room and decide what is interesting to us as scientists, and go off in our brilliance, and it really is interesting, and it really is brilliant. It's just that when we start to communicate and try to get our kids interested in that, we forget that we started at the final chapter, and that we never would have understood it either if we had started at the final chapter. So making sure that whenever a science subject is introduced, that we are asking up front, so what? Why do I care? And viewing those questions by our kids, particularly our teenagers who totally are all about, I don't care, taking that statement at face value. They will not be motivated, they will not learn if you don't tell them why they should care or help them see why they should care. And there are connections to be made. And as adults, we need to help make the connections between the brilliant scientists and where our children are so that we can help bridge that gap. Oop. Keep going forward. All right, and we also know how to do it. So we don't have to go spend a lot of money researching how to do it. We know that if we use inquiry teaching strategies, which don't work so well with translation, we know if we engage our audiences, if we pull people out and ask them where they are, if we build ownership in the content and the content development, we're going to be more successful in having active, engaged learners who are going to own the material. We also know that if we provide hands-on opportunities, that we build that context, that we build that record of experience and understanding, that kids are going to learn, they're going to remember it, they're going to own it, and they're going to develop a sense of identity around it. It's all about developing that sense of motivation. For some kids, that's emotion. If that emotion is because they're deeply concerned about climate change and what it's doing to their communities, or they're deeply concerned about climate change and what it's doing to somebody else's community, it doesn't matter. But that connection needs to be made. And we know that we know how to do these things. We don't all personally know how, but there are really great programs and really great research, really great identified best practices. So it's not about what we don't know. It's about providing, again, the appropriate opportunities that align well with our known contexts and our known barriers. And so I can't come in here and tell you how to apply these to your individual contexts because I don't know them. So that's why I'm trying to share some things at the high level. However, what is really interesting is that there is this kind of moment of awakening, a realization of a power, of an identification, of an ability to innovate, to create, to learn, that is monumental in how we move forward. These two people have something in common, and it's this phrase, make almost anything. Recently was reading the beginning, so don't quiz me on the end, of the new biography on Steve Jobs, and he did make this statement that there was that moment when he realized that he could make almost anything. That didn't just happen. He was the son of a man who was a machinist, who was a mechanic, who was doing things constantly, who was fixing things constantly, who kind of dove into projects and figured out solutions. He also was raised in an environment where electronics and innovation were just the guy next door, the woman down the street. This was his world, and those products, that the electronic, the stuff that was needed to create was right there. It was part of his environment. The ability to create was part of how he was raised, the ability to fix. And when he realized all of that in the context of his own skills, he realized he could make almost anything. So then fast forward to Neil Gershenfeld, who I've known for several years, and what he ends up saying also at MIT. He was the director of MIT Center for Bits and Bots. He ran a class for his graduate students called Make Almost Anything. And it was during this class that he realized that it wasn't just the PhD students at MIT who had this capacity, that really what he was introducing them to was an art form, was a competency that could apply to anyone. That anyone who had a problem they were motivated to solve with the appropriate tools and some initial skill building could solve their own problems. So Neil's solution to that was to create not just his own capacity, but create capacity for other people. So he started a movement of Fab Labs. There are now, just 2 years ago, I used to say there were 40. Now there are apparently over 100 Fab Labs, including one at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. A Fab Lab is a relatively small environment. It's a slightly high-tech wood shop that maybe, or metal shop that maybe you participated in when you were in high school. But it basically introduces computer-assisted design, which any of us can do if somebody stands over your shoulders and gives you a couple minutes of instructions. And those computers are assisted to things equipment that makes stuff. So a router that cuts out big pieces of wood, or a laser cutter, which is right in front of this young woman here, or a vinyl printer, which is also behind her. And you literally can make almost anything in this space. In fact, Neil's goal is that a Fab Lab can replicate itself. And where are these? These are designed as 24-hour a day, 7-day a week storefront opportunities in some of our highest needs communities around the world, whether it's in Ghana or South Africa or above the Arctic Circle in Norway, or on the south side of Boston or on the south side of Chicago. These are opportunities where community members can come in, develop a sense of ownership, learn the basic skills, and then start solving and making solutions to their problems together. The labs are hooked up remotely so that across all these labs they can communicate and collaborate what they've learned, how they are using their equipment. So this is At the museum, we use it to introduce some of our the youth in our development programs. We also have developed clubs with some of our local high schools.